Many of you probably don't know who I am. My name is Tom Dickinson. I'm in Tackling Torture at the top committee of WHAM. So I've got to give a bit of an introduction so you can know how the hell this is happening and who we are. So I'm on this committee and I've been for whatever, 8 years, 9 years, something like this. I'm also the founder and president of a nonprofit that's now in its 26th year. Called Siberian Bridges, and it deals specifically with a specific part of Siberia, Eastern Siberia, very remote Siberia, called Zabaikalsky, which is beyond Lake Baikal, and the capital city is Chita. And I've been going there since 1989, and the organization's been since 1993. It's been a Minnesota nonprofit since 2001. And it's been in its present form, because you probably are aware nonprofits can have lots of problems, and we did, and we've got our present form, which is its best form, so has been since 2009. Sitting over here on my left is our chairman, Chuck Ritchie. He was the chairman of Connect USSR, which became Connect US Russia. A wonderful Minnesota cultural exchange organization that died in 2008, something like that. So the purpose of Siberian Bridges, our mission statement is contact and cooperation for the purposes of mutual understanding and respect. And the form it takes is if anybody in that region of Siberia has an idea of a project we can work together on, we look and say, can we do it? We try to say yes. And if we come up with an idea for cooperation, the same thing. The current project, so there is no theme. And we try as hard as possible, being Americans, we're used to charitable work in the world like we are God's gift. And the idea is to step away from that view, which has been a project for us. But I think it's most successful right now, as successful as we have ever been. The current form, our biggest project is support for an orphanage. So what you can pass this around, you'll see the map. Moscow is over here. Where we deal with is way, and even though it only looks like 1.5 inches, you've got to stick in way the hell over here. It's 5 time zones, used to be 6 time zones from Moscow. It's the exact opposite side of the globe from us. 15 time zones right now from us. So the current biggest project is support for an orphanage in a remote town of this region. This project was initiated by Olga, who I will introduce over here. Chuck glommed onto it immediately, and it's now our strongest one. But we also do another, a different kind of support project for an orphanage that's in the city of Chita. We have tourism, which is my project to try to get Americans over there to meet people and see the place, and demystify it. We are getting back into English education support. So one of it's actually she's a high school volunteer right now, is going to go next summer and teach at a summer camp. Anything that can come up. We did Christmas card exchanges last year. There's going to be a tour of, fingers crossed, a tour next year of kids, 11 to 17-year-old kids to Twin Cities in the next fall. Whatever can be done. So the point is to meet, the point is to be concrete. Okay, so now, this event right now. Elena Pishcherskaia, professor of English at Chita Institute of Baikal State University. It's a small branch of a large university in another city. And Olga Fleshler, retired professor of English in the city of Chita at the Pedagogical Institute, then Technical University, are here for the second time to present a paper at the, it's American, right? No, Association of Slavic East European and Eurasian Studies, ASEEES. They have a convention, it's a huge organization, they have a convention every year in a different American city. They came in 2014 and presented a paper. They were just in San Francisco presenting a paper. And they, of course, they have to stay and be tourists and visit their friends here in Minnesota. And Siberian Bridges ended up being asked by Elena to give her an official invitation, which helps her with her institution back home. But it gives us a great opportunity to meet people from way the hell over there. Of course, you, of course, are all way the hell over here, so it's mutual. And as this thing had said, if you had read this, they are not political scientists, they're not particular peaceniks like this group is. They're just friends. They're just people that we know very, very closely. I've known Olga since 1992. I've known Elena since 2007. They are our strongest, our Siberian Bridges' strongest contacts in the city for getting projects to happen. But they are, like all of us, just normal people. And so the idea was, as it says here, there are lousy relationships with Russia right now, horrible relationships, if you believe what you read in the news. And you should, to an extent, because that news that we're reading pretty much is fed to us by the State Department, by the Department of Defense and CIA and so on, like this, right? They're stenographers. In large part, not completely, but in large part. So, probably the single strongest thing that we can do is to meet and debunk this stuff, demystify it, and actually note that we're all in this together. So that was the idea of this conversation. So the idea is, is actually conversation back and forth, starting with, you can have questions. Elena has, I think, the first best question. And so I want to start with her, and then I'm going to shut up. And I guess I am ready to shut up, unless you have any particular questions for me before we get going. Excellent. So, Elena, your question.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. First of all, let's say it's an honor for us to be here to meet you. I guess what Tom mentioned, the question. I asked him. So what is this organization about? So it's clear from the name, Women Against Military Madness. Well, the idea is clear, but I actually asked what are the actual themes that, or actual activities that this organization is engaged in, and that's what Tom. Okay, you'll ask it. You'll start with that. So I'm asking it.
Go ahead. Where'd Lucia go?
Right behind us.
There, Lucia! I'm calling on you.
He's been,
Oh dear.
I think, the longest with
WHAM was started by a little cluster of women in 1982 during the Reagan administration, I believe, because we think things couldn't get worse, and because of nuclear threats. And it's evolved into an organization that is, for the most part, led by women. Women are the decision makers, although men are invited and encouraged to participate. And through a variety of educational and activist events, we try to raise awareness about the crazy aspects of U.S. military expenditures and aggressions, including the fact that the United States has 800 military bases outside of the United States in other lands. And the expenditures on that and the aggressive nature of our militarized society is something that we've been speaking out against through just educational sessions that are small or larger, through movies and discussions, through demonstrations of anywhere from 4,000 to 7,000 people, and just to continue to be a presence saying no about the militarization of our culture. That's yes, thank you.
Before I moved to Minneapolis, I was part of a group, this during the 1980s. I was a slow beginner with the U.S. military madness, but I was part of the Pledge of Resistance, and this again is under Ronald Reagan and the infamous wars of Central America. And I moved here in the 1990s. Basically, I became a member of WHAM. But again, it's a continuation of this war mentality. And the problem is we have basically two war parties. It doesn't matter if you defend the Democratic Party, it doesn't matter if you join the Republican Party. Our foreign policy is horrific. And again, we have these spheres of influence. And right now, we are the solo superpower. I mean, we have so many myth makings. We have the best propaganda money can buy. And again, it's very hard because we have different perspectives and we have different issues, but we're all related. And again, like we're just human, and sometimes we don't see eye to eye, and sometimes we don't create the space. But basically, we really need to confront our war-based economy. I mean, we can't control our system that is totally corrupt. And so people worldwide have to pay the consequences. And now we're seeing it more likely coming home to roost.
One thing that it's hard for me, this whole thing of the election, our elections are so sacred when we have overthrown democracies and tried to influence. It's hard for me to know, people here say, no, they're not doing it. And I go, why wouldn't, everybody's around the world, the way we impact the world, why wouldn't they want to influence America somewhat? And then when we've done so much of it, I don't need to know all the details about Trump and all this stuff, but I mean, they've been doing it for a long time, and they, for decades, since the 1950s for sure, and we do a lot of influencing of elections on Indian reservations in this country too. I mean, so far we don't have any, if there's any elections in WHAM, I don't think there's a foreign government or our government trying to impact our elections here. But they've tried to do it in other organizations.
And it's just that now, again, the Democratic Party, in an effort to explain away the loss of Hillary Clinton in 2016 against Donald Trump, and it really even before that, because she was pushing for it, especially since the overthrow in 2014 of the government in Ukraine, and then the absorption of Crimea into Russia. It's been that now that Russia is again the enemy throughout the entire Cold War. Of course, you know what happened then. But and then with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the U.S. began casting about immediately for who we can make our enemies, so we can keep these militarized budgets that offer just increased inequality in our country economically, and it's getting worse and worse all the time. Now they're back on focusing on Russia, and everything is Russia, Russia, Russia. Even in the UK recent election, they were trying to blame anything that the Labour Party did to try to combat the Conservatives, the Tories, on Russia, infiltration by Russia. And in the meantime, we're not looking at what's happening in our own country about who's on the internet trolling everybody. It's not Russia, it's people within our own country, organizations within our own country, sometimes our intelligence services. So it's looking so bad for this hatred of Russia and demonization of Putin. I suppose every country does that, but the US is really good at demonizing individual leaders, no matter who. And, making them like an antichrist. post. And so, you know, that's, I think, one thing that we're very concerned about as ordinary people here. What do we, you know, how do we do something about this? How do we look at it? What do Russian people think? You know, maybe you can give us some indications of what ordinary people in Russia think about the demonization of their country not that long after the end of the Cold War.
So can I ask about that? I mean, you're here in the United States. Do you listen to U.S. media? Do you hear this kind of propaganda that we're subjected to day after day? And how do you feel about it?
How do we feel about what? About Russia being...
That Russia is the evil empire, that they're out to get us and they're going to destroy our elections and our democracy, and it's horrible stuff.
Yeah, no, really.
Well, it's just a mirror situation, because in Russia, who and what is being demonized? The United States. So it's a mirror situation.
Wow, really.
So what do they say about us?
They are the worst enemy with the most aggressive military slant.
Yes, I think the difference might be is that we are in that defending position, like the United States are the bad guys trying to do harm to a not that strong, like a big boy trying being so bad to a small, somebody smaller, and it's like we are in that. It's, I don't know. It feels like the idea is that it wasn't us who started. So we are just in that. We have to protect ourselves from that aggression of a big boy that is trying to be bad with a small, harmless creature like Russia. But that's the propaganda and media is all about the United States. It's all about the Ukraine and the United States, and how much, to what extent the United States is involved in the Ukraine crisis, that everything is what's going on is under the influence of the United States, and so on. So all the talks, if a person should watch that federal media, federal channels, that would be definitely all the talks are about the same. The United States is to blame for everything.
Do they talk about
Except they're getting
the
the
way we're
truth.
treating the people, the refugees coming up across the border in Central America and Mexico? Do they talk about our treatment of those people?
Well, they talk about everything, especially if something is bad. I guess it's quite natural when something. Media don't talk about domestic problems as much as they talk about problems abroad. So if something happens in Europe or in the United States and that is negative, so it will be in every on every channel, in every media in Russia. But if something quite similar would happen in Russia, that would not be given much talk about. And yes, I think that what surprised me once when my son was in daycare, he was like 4 years old, I came there and there were children in that place, and some of them was very convincing, saying that Obama is a bad guy, like 4-year-old. Everybody knows a lot about the United States and Russia. Is very politically illiterate. There is much talk about politics.
I would like to add something to what Lena had just said. I had a private student, a boy of 9, and when we were doing some text about the United States, he said, "My father doesn't like America. My father doesn't like Americans. And I asked him, what does he know about America? Has he ever met any real-life American? Has he shaken hands with any person from beyond the ocean? No. So how come he doesn't like Americans? What doesn't he like about them? What is it that he knows about American people, about what they like to eat, about how they communicate with each other? Does the father know anything about how the lifestyle of American people, of how their communities interact and cooperate? He said, I don't think he does so. What's the idea? It's all because of the impact of the official propaganda.
Yeah.
And official propaganda is, it's just, playing back and forth between the politicians. But common people, we are not politicians. So our idea, or our mission as teachers, as we see, don't we, is to instill in our students the spirit of mutual understanding and of an attempt to try to learn something about other nations and about Americans in the first place. Why in the first place? China is next door. We know a lot about Chinese. America is, like Tom said, where is he? All over there. But we have to know about Americans more, even more about the Chinese, though we live next door to China, because America is being demonized and people start being afraid, but they shouldn't. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, we do. So you, as ordinary citizens, look at a lot of the what we call mainstream media. You look at it as propaganda. You assume it's propaganda. You don't fall for the stories as anything other than the message of the government and what the government wants its people to believe. Whereas, I don't know if people do so much here. We do, but I think most people in this room always are mistrustful, of the official story and want to find out what's behind it. But I don't know if ordinary Americans as much will view the mainstream government line as propaganda.
Depends on whether there's fear or not going on. I mean, if they feel threatened after 9/11, they were going to believe anything.
So you have mostly state-run media? Is that true? I mean, in the United States, we have this idea, this perception that our media is free, right? That they're not part of the government. And I think that's maybe part of the confusion, is like we think we have an independent source that's giving us real information.
Right.
And a lot of us here know that that's not true. That a lot of the information comes directly through and from the government. And it's a lot of just plain propaganda. So I think that's part of it. People have the idea that we have this free media market.
Right, because it's owned by individuals that aren't necessarily in the government. It's just they make money off all the government and initiate a lot of them. Yeah.
Can I add something? Last time I was there, Elena, we had our group of 6 people. We sat down with students of English that wanted to talk English. And we'd sit at a table for a half an hour and talk, and then we'd get up and move to another table. We did this for about 3 hours. And I was with a group of young people, and I said, well, where do you get your news? You watch television? No way. You read the newspapers? No way. I said, why not? And they said, because it's all propaganda, we can't believe that. I said, where do you get your news? Social media.
Right.
And I said, well, now wait a minute. Isn't social media potentially as inaccurate and misleading as the regular news sources? They said, yes, but we try to verify. And what I took away from that is that there was a discernment on the part of young people that I did not expect. That, they've heard all of this, but for these young kids that I was talking to, they didn't trust their media. So it's, I'm not so sure. I think we are probably more trusting of our media than they are of theirs.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this has to do with, we have private facts versus the public version of what's going on. And again, you've got the media, which is owned by a handful of very wealthy individuals who are looking after their own interests. It's not to inform the public about what's really going on. It's to sell or to pitch or to, undermine what we really call democracy. And again, it's very hard for us to confront that we have got a lot of serious issues here, how corrupt our system is. It's easier for us to say, oh, that country is very corrupt and look how these people can, they have no choice. And it's just like, well, what real choice do we have? It's just like they have their agenda and they know what they want to accomplish. It's just that they differ on the means to accomplish that. But as I say, we've got this mentality. We have two war-based economies. And again, I don't like to label things, but it's easier for us to understand. So we've got the neocons basically versus the neoliberals. The neocons are more apt to have military might. They don't care of the consequences as long as they can achieve what they want, domination. And then we've got the good Democrats and neoliberals who say, oh, we're going to have free trade. And this is just unbelievable. We really don't have good conversations. I think people are very defensive, like how un-American are you, hate your country, and all this. And it's very defensive because the walls go up. But to have healthy exchange is kind of so lacking in our society.
So, go ahead. Actually, one of the things that I wanted to ask you doctors is about, I'm actually very curious about Chita, is the cities, you say it's on, or very close to Lake Baikal? Oh, okay. What's the economy sort of based on there? Is it like timber, mining, or
Both.
Both. Okay.
Timber and mining.
Okay.
Primarily.
And it's mostly like mostly ethnic Russians, or do you also have like Buryat or Vikil?
Yes. Well, there is Buryat Autonomous District that has been. It was actually a separate part of Russia until I believe some 10 years ago, right?
2008.
What's the name?
11. That's
who are they?
Irkutsk Buryat Autonomous District. And in 2010?
But it
Yeah,
was
something
within
like
the Zabaikalsky Krai. Two separate entities.
Yeah, and they were united. Now the Zabaikalsky region is one federal entity together with that Buryat. So we have a lot of Buryats in our region.
Who are they? What are they?
Buryats,
Yeah.
like Native Americans partly.
They're descended from the Mongols.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
What percentage of what?
They're
The
descended from the Mongols.
Oh, I see.
There's a map going around that I printed out.
Just keep
Oh,
going.
Shows where they're from.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay.
They still
Yeah.
share
So
a
it's-
lot of
yeah.
religious rituals and traditions with Mongols, and they have those festivals. We are not far from Mongolia. I mean, it's like there's been rise of ethnical traditions. I mean, they try to preserve the heritage, historical heritage of Buryat people. So,
They are Buddhists.
Oh, Buddhists. Yeah, I was going to say, are you like the prevailing religion in? If you, for anybody who is religious, is it Orthodox Russian? Okay, but these are Buddhists. Ah, okay. Are there any Muslims in? Would you say? Or?
There
Yeah,
are Muslims and there is a mosque.
Oh,
A functioning active mosque.
I see. Is there prejudice against Muslims that you detect at all?
Not much.
But there aren't many, is that part of the reason maybe? They don't have a lot of numbers and power?
Well, they're quite numerous. People come from the from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, those countries. There are many migrants from those countries, and they're all
Former Soviet republics.
yeah, a lot of people. So I think that historical background that our country used to be a multinational and multi-ethnic country, that memory doesn't prevents people from some prejudice or hatred based on religious or nationality. So we all coexist peacefully. Buryats never considered to be like different, though they're physically different, but there is nothing like prejudice or anything about them. And the same with Muslims. You know?
And also, you should take into account that we are Siberia. Siberia is a different story. It's not the same as Central Russia. So if there is, I don't know about that, but if there is any prejudice, any bias against ethnic groups in Moscow, for example, there is. There is nothing like that, or there is nothing as strong as that in Siberia. It couldn't be otherwise. Siberia is a different story.
And how would you describe that then, that difference? More open-minded?
More open-minded, as one of the American critics once said, I do not remember the name, he said, he discovered that in Siberia, people march to a different tune. People march to a different tune compared to those in Central Russia.
Because of distance?
Because of the distance and because of this revolutionary heritage. Because Siberia was not from this. Siberia was, you know that, a place of exile. Who was sent into exile? The best of the people, not necessarily criminals. Criminals too, of course, but not necessarily political criminals. So political dissenters, and they always represented the best part of the people. So we are their heirs.
That's what we're kind of like.
Wow, that's a
1848, all the
interesting
German people got
characterization.
Well, actually, when I came here the first time in 1997 to teach a very short course in history, Siberia, from Yermak to Yeltsin. Yermak was the conqueror of Siberia. And so in my discourse, I told the American students that the history of Siberia and past the Ural Mountains, beyond the Ural Mountains, the history of Siberia and the history of America are much the same. It's about conquering new places. So we will, Siberians will have the same pioneer spirit as first American settlers. So that's the reason.
So we have that in the U.S. too. We have the urban-rural divide, populated areas and the less populated areas in a sense. But I go to a lot of policy conferences, and I have the opportunity then to talk to Russian citizens about policy, and I always find myself hearing myself saying, "Wow, you know, it's like I wish I had that. I wish we had that. I wish we had that." But they come generally, I think, from the more populated areas, around Moscow, probably, and then. So, what are the community services, public services like out in your area? I thought I heard you were here supporting the orphanage. Is that right?
Well, our organization, Siberian Bridges, supports, works with an orphanage in Zabaikalsky. That's one of our major projects.
But just in general, I guess. Do you understand the question? I mean.
Social balance.
We have things like, I don't know, Social Security, Medicare. We don't have a healthcare system in our country. We don't have, our educational system is crumbling. Things like that. That's what I'm calling social services. You have public schools.
That is more unified in Russia, it feels to me, than here in the United States. So the educational system is unified throughout the country. In every region, we have the same federal laws of education and standards and requirements to different stages of education. And we have that unified state exam in the end of the secondary school that gives students, to my mind, unique opportunity to enter any university in the country with the results of the state exam, which actually doesn't do any good for our region because people leave our place for bigger places, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, because they do have that chance. Some 20 years ago, you could imagine that a person from Chita graduated from school and went to Moscow to enter Moscow State University. That was impossible because of all those divisions. Like, you are from Chita, we're not interested in that. We want our Moscow people here. And now that state exam gives that opportunity, and it's so bad for us, but it's good for them, good for young people that can have those opportunities. And it's the same with the medical insurance. Once you are born in Russia, you have medical insurance, and you have right to get medical assistance, and it's paid free. It's paid.
Yeah, hearing that, it's like, wow, I wish we had that.
And
College is free as well? Or does it cost a little bit?
There are some, the so-called budget.
Government financed.
It's not grants or scholarships. It's financed by government. The government decides on what spheres of state's industry they are going to finance. For example, if you want to be an economist, there is almost no chance that you can get that government support because there are too many economists in our country. But
Excuse me, I've had my hand up for about 20 minutes and you guys can't see it up front, so I'm just going to burst in. I want to tell you something that happened. I work in the office here, and yesterday I got a great news from a group I've never heard of called Balance of Power, and they are going to change the world by promoting blimps with Trump, but it's going to be called Comrade Trump-Off. And he's going to be wearing a Russian general's uniform, and he is going to be denouncing Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and the GRU of the Russian military intelligence. And they have this little video with this bad Russian accent, and Trump talking about how he loves Putin. And so I happened to get this yesterday, and I wrote and I said, it's funny, tomorrow I'm going to meet with some actual Russians, and I just don't think, because we need to be people to people and to talk to each other, and I don't think using a vicious stereotype of Russians is going to help us create a better world. So he wrote back, I said, I suppose you think of your product as funny or me as clueless, which is you're right, but if you think about it for a moment, you might see how your actions are not helpful. Well, he wrote back and he said, sorry to offend, a foreign nation has subverted our government, interfered in our election, and placed an individual who is beholden to them in the most important position of power in the world. We don't dislike the Russian people. What we do believe our president is not looking out for America's interests. when he deals with Russia. So I thought to myself, I haven't replied, this just came in today, but I thought to myself, gee, a foreign nation has subverted a government, interfered in its election, and placed an individual in power like what, Bolivia, Iran, Guatemala, how many times has the U.S. done it? But this person who is obviously politically active seems like the only time this has ever happened is today. And that's kind of the thinking that we in this room have to deal with from our fellow Americans.
Thank you.
Some of them just seem, we don't teach history in this country well, and some of them just seem clueless about the history of our government and what it's done. So do you have that same problem in Russia? Do you have a lot of people there that also have just swallowed the stereotypes and, you know, are you dealing with that in Russia as much as we deal with that here?
People do swallow the stereotypes.
It's the same phrase. People always do because it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Because it's easy, and it also takes an extent of education. The more educated people are, the less they are subject to come under the influence of media and of propaganda.
And I think there's kind of just, okay, this person, or, you know, so many people don't watch the news, period. They don't know if there's fires in California. So if somebody thinks they're kind of really savvy, oh, this is what's happening to our government, I know more than the average person. And they really don't go deep enough in history, but just because they know something, it's like a little bit of knowledge is dangerous.
True.
And I think there's something to that, you know, wait, you're just listening sometimes. Because I mean, I can't get over how many people know absolutely nothing about, you know, a hurricane, you know, an earthquake, you know, things that are not, you know, they don't care about anything. And so then they think they're a step above, but they're really onto something here.
The other thing, I think there's a certain level of just, and this may be true in Russia and everywhere, but especially in this country, there's a certain level of just, it's almost laziness, political laziness, and that people don't want to think, and everything gets projected through their particular, in this country especially, their partisan view. So for instance, like there are people like the last 3 years of Trump who have taken this position that Trump is a Russian agent, Russia put him there, so on and so forth, and they say the most insane things, but you know, 5 years ago they would have been all for peace and saying, well, U.S. and Russia have to negotiate and so on, and now, you know, they're ready to I don't know if you remember have you ever seen the movie Dr. Strangelove? An old doctor where he rides the bomb down with the hat. Well, a lot of people who are, you know, normally liberal people are ready to hop on that bomb and wave their hat around. And it's just I mean, it's just laziness in some ways. And, you know, and I think people only overcome that when they're forced to confront what's happening. But it's a little disturbing, and I don't know if that's true. I imagine it's true everywhere. In Russia, probably the same.
We have this funny phenomenon that we call kitchen descent. Kitchen descent. People talk a lot, but it's in the privacy of their own kitchens, their own homes. It's not so often, well, I'm talking about Chita, not about Moscow. So, well, they prefer to stay inside the privacy of their own homes and talk and denounce the government and speak about how corrupt everything is. But,
Can I ask something about Siberia, just in terms of families there? Are there people who can trace their families in Siberia back to the 1880s under the Tsar and before that in the 1930s? I mean, are people conscious that they are, you know, that they came at different times as exiles, or has it been long enough that people just are?
Well, you know, it just occurred to me that Lena and I represent a very interesting phenomenon. We come from different come from different, well, I'm a representative of the intellectuals of the Soviet period. Lena is a representative of the intellectuals of Russia, of modern Russia. There is a lot of things that we share. There are many things that we look at through the same perspective, but maybe there are things that will not separate us, but that will distinguish me from her. She is a mastermind of so many things. She's a whiz at all those app things. I'm not.
That's here too.
Well, I don't know if she hasn't yet started hating me for that. She has to do so many things for me. I rob her of her precious time. But what is important, we are trying to raise our students in the spirit of all those noble ideals. Noble ideals, and not like, pipe dreaming, but trying to make something happen.
I can't hear very well. It's too damn far away.
If you want to know something about how people were raised, people my age, were raised in the Soviet Union in the period of the, какая-то была диктатура-то пролетариата, of the dictatorship of the proletariat. I'm a true representative. So ask me anything about that.
One question I have has to do with, there used to be classes in America on how to be a good citizen called civics. And Ronald Reagan got rid of that, so people don't have civics, how government works, how to talk to your legislature, just kind of basic information. So the American we're seeing is some maybe astute young people, but the general population doesn't get that education anymore. And what kind of civics are you teaching the young people in your schools about how to be a good citizen of Russia, what are the values that you're trying to raise young people that are cultural for Siberia?
Да, что у нас сейчас какие-то эти предметы есть? Не, есть забайкаловедение всякое. Да есть, я же знаю.
Забайкаловедение it's not how to be a good citizen.
It's not? To love and respect and protect nature does not mean how to be a good citizen.
What animals you can meet in your area is not how to be a good citizen.
It's how to be.
It's for children aged 7, 8. What Zabaikalsky
But being an environmentalist is important.
Of course. So to be a good environmentalist is to be a good citizen. I can't talk about high school because I do not know their curriculum.
Because I want to say that I'm concerned about all the non-human life, both plant and animal, that are disappearing though too, that are going extinct. But I wanted to say something about elections. The election system in this country is appalling. The number of people who are now voting on very unverifiable computers that flip your vote. And the thing is that I've heard on a show called The Broadcast that we should all be voting on paper ballots. And I think in Georgia, when black people sent in a mailed ballot, that maybe their vote wasn't counted. They found some excuse not to even count it. People are purged from the voter rolls. Electoral college can only be gotten rid of by voting, having 3/5 of the state vote against it. Gerrymandering, how do you get rid of that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you're going to ask how they voted in Russia?
How do you vote in Russia?
Yeah.
Is this the question?
Yeah.
How do you vote in Russia?
Yeah, we use that. We have this paper ballot. Yes. And we put a sign in front of the name.
Do you vote on paper ballots?
You tick
Yes.
the name
are there candidates from different parties or whatever that it's, because in the Soviet Union, wasn't it just kind of one party? Yeah, so that's all changed now and there's different parties?
Yes, a lot of different, and you can be like an independent candidate as well.
How long does, like, your main federal elections go for? How long do they campaign before the election? Here it's about a year and a half or 2 years. Or 6. Or maybe longer.
I'd say 4.
It's about 3 months.
Like 3 months,
Yeah. Are your campaigns state funded? Or is it private money?
This is the problem. Nobody knows precisely whose money it is. Whose money it is that supports the campaign.
Like in this country.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, we're supposed to have websites. If you give a pretty big donations and you're supposed to track it, and there are some websites that you can look up if you research. So in theory, you're supposed to, but there's a lot of cheating that goes on as well. But in theory, we're supposed to have a website. It's called Official Secrets or something like that.
Right.
And you can look up and find out where, and it's only some donations. If it's small donations, then it's more anonymous. But if it's a huge one, in theory, it's supposed to be tracked. But they're prosecuting people all the time for cheating on this. And of course, our elections go so long that
I'm wondering, could you suggest some good books we could read about Siberia, about Russia, Moscow? And secondly, can you elaborate a little bit about Mikhail Gorbachev? I believe in 1989 that there was a gentleman's agreement that the U.S., that NATO would not expand into Eastern Europe. And again, could you tell us the facts, like what happened? And I mean, it's just horrific that we are expanding into Eastern Europe.
Gorbachev introduced that period of perestroika. Well, roughly translated reconstruction, rearrangement, retooling, and all that. Perestroika. People believed in it because, well, the situation was actually stagnant and, well, many found it stifling, and so it was like a breath of fresh air. But nothing happened because they started fighting. And soon Gorbachev was ousted by Yeltsin, and all the turmoil began. Well, democracy, they proclaimed, Yeltsin proclaimed that local governments and republic governments could allow themselves as much sovereignty as they could swallow. And the notion is so loose, so wide, that it just ended up in absolute chaos. And the republic started to secede. Is the verb right? Secession? Yes. To secede.
Right.
Well, eventually it landed in destructing the Soviet Union. Though the popular vote, there was a popular referendum. And the referendum was 71% for re-signing the agreement, the Soviet agreement, the agreement of 1922.
Really?
Конечно, absolutely. 71%. They ignored it.
I heard a lot of people in Russia did not like what happened because it destroyed what kind of economic benefits they did have from the Soviet system. And I did hear that. Is that true then?
Yes, it's true. Yeah. Well, how would you like if all of a sudden,
yes,
out of the blue, your country just dispersed? How would you like that? Yeah. It happened in 1991, I went to work in China in 1992, and for me to see, to meet the Chinese people who used to be our friends, and looking at me with condescension, saying, "You are no longer more a Soviet citizen." They told me, "Sulian Meiyou, there is no Soviet Union anymore." And I would reply, "Yo, Zaitra, it's in my heart," and it is in my heart. So, to the end of my life, because it was a great country, believe it or not, like it or not.
The Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union.
Yeah.
说得好。
Thank you.
Well, another thing I heard, we had a person speak at Peace Talk, which is in Red Wing, Bruce Gagnon, who does not like the idea of weapons in space, but at any rate, he said that the Crimea voted to go with Russia because of what they saw in eastern Ukraine, when Nazis, called them Nazis, went to a union hall where people had gathered, and they were in this union hall, and the Nazis started throwing Molotov cocktails into the building, and when people jumped out of the window, they were beaten to death. And this is on YouTube, but no one was ever held responsible. So that's why they say Crimea voted to go with Russia. What do you think of that? Do you think that's true?
Well, I don't know much about that. I don't know if this is true. I know that our government, Putin, they took advantage of the moment and just they did what they had always wanted to do, to return Crimea.
Because Khrushchev had given Crimea away,
I don't know if this is true, what I'm going to say, but the speculation is that Khrushchev did it for two reasons. Reason one, he wanted to make...
Did what? Gave Crimea
Gave
to,
Crimea, yeah.
to the Ukraine.
Gave Crimea to the Ukraine. Reason one, he wanted to make up for what he had done to the Ukrainians and to other people at the time of the repressions. Because he was one of the henchmen, so to speak. Khrushchev. Reason two, he wanted to empower himself. He wanted to gain extra support.
The vote was, it's deeper. That's an important thing, that Crimea used to be a part of Russian Republic, not Ukrainian. And what Olga was talking about is when Khrushchev made Crimea part of Ukrainian Republic within the
Just give it as a
Soviet.
gift.
Yeah.
Just sign the paper.
And when people voted, of course there were those horrible events that time, but they had that, not heritage, but it's weird how many families, even in Chita, have relatives in the Ukraine. We used to be one country, and families used to go to visit each other into a different, now they are different countries for the weekend, just to celebrate holidays, because I have an aunt in Kharkov or a grandmother in Donbass, for example. So it's much deeper than just, that common history is still there. Families are divided by that, first by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now people can't visit their relatives in the Ukraine if they live in Russia.
I have a nephew in Kiev. He cannot come to visit his relatives in Irkutsk and me in Chita because he's in Kiev and he's on the government's job. And if he comes, he'll be blacklisted.
By Ukraine?
Kiev is in Ukraine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
I don't know what to ask you about. You spoke about when you lived under the governments of the proletariat and how that's changed for you. I don't know what to ask, but I'd like you to say something about that.
To say about what? About how I lived under communism?
Yeah.
Happily. Because I was young. When you are young, you are always happy. But that's the eternal truth. We had a good system of education in the sense that we had good teachers who were well educated. That's why you can call me.
What period of time? What period of time are we?
I finished school in 1957. I was 17 years old, 1957. You may call me presumptuous. I consider myself as a well-educated person because I had good teachers in high school. I had very good teachers in college. After I graduated from college, I was sent to Moscow to take my doctorate degree. In Moscow is the concentration of the best intellectuals. So I had better than best of teachers in Moscow. I came back to Chita and I taught students at the Pedagogical Institute. It was a law, it was a strict rule that once every 5 years a university teacher in the rural areas is supposed to go to the central universities to take, как они называются, курсы повышения professional development programs every 5 years, like it or not. You have a family, you don't have a family, you go there and take these additional courses.
Yeah.
And it was all government funded. It's not like now. Ask Lena about that, how they develop their professional training now at their own expense. If you have money,
Right.
If you don't,
It's too bad.
it's too bad. But that was the Soviet system. So how could I not be happy? There were restrictions, of course. For example, now I can, if I have money, I can go anywhere in the world. Lena took me to Mexico. How do you like that? But before that, I took her to America. How do you like that?
I put Siberia into our Google here. Pipeline to China comes up. Some dog from 18,000 years ago that was found in a... Do you know about the Siberian dog that was found in a glacier?
Yes, I do.
No, it was a dog. They don't know if it's a dog or a wolf, but they found some ancient animal.
Right.
And it's in here like 20 times. Like that's what's interesting to Google about Siberia.
Right.
So, and then the only other thing mentioned is the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Oh, we all know that Google.
So why do you think we might have a superficial idea about Siberia in this country?
Nothing about elephant tusks, mammoth tusks? Nothing about mammoth tusks?
No. One of the things, this is for Tom and, what's your name again? Chuck, yeah. We have those sister city arrangements. And I suppose maybe this has crossed your minds or whatever, but it's possible, again, because collaboration and friendly exchange and whatever is considered one of the best ways to defeat war propaganda. And even the foreign exchange program for young kids that go, and unfortunately in the United States, because I had a foreign exchange student 3 years ago, I found out that in the United States, more and more, especially if it's not an allied country, then they're not going to be allowed, and Americans will not take foreign exchange students. This has all changed a lot in the last few years. We used to kind of have a much more welcoming, now maybe yes, if you're from France, if it's considered allied, but now it's, they would be constantly sending things, take this student, nobody will take them, that kind of thing. So that's one of the ways to have a nice learning, educational, real people, and especially if you're a teenager and you had a brother or a sister who came from a foreign country, whatever. So I'm just thinking if it's not something that, I don't think it's real difficult to get a sister city thing going with either St. Paul or Minneapolis and Chita, because they do have many. They have many. St. Paul has, I forget what they are now, but there's quite a few. And it's nice because it gives some official recognition, and it might be of some help. Maybe it's just too much work and effort to worry about. But also the other thing I wanted to mention is the exchange with the students that you've been helping with, and Tom, where you have students online and Skyping each other between Russia, China, and the United States. Wonderful, wonderful. And again, maybe there are ways, if you think about expanding that, because, you know, again, this war propaganda here, and of course, obviously, even with you, but it's everywhere, is very hard to defeat. And I just wanted to add one more thing. One of the parts of propaganda that the liberals use is that we're freeing the people. So we don't say, we hate your leaders are bad, and you do all the demonization of the leader. But then you can't demonize all the people, the civilians. And so the myth that goes with it is that we're freeing the poor people. And we had a famous Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State, and she was accused, oh, you cut off Iraqis and 500,000 children died. She goes, we think the price was worth it for freeing the ones who lived, or something. It makes no sense at all. But I just wanted to point out that to the extent that people the propaganda is that the rest of the world is not free, and that we will work to overthrow those terrible leaders in order to help and free the people, even though a lot of people die. I mean, it makes no sense at all, because the people die when you're doing this. But that's the propaganda that we live with and see every single day.
That sanctions are perfectly okay.
Yeah, sanctions, that's what Madeleine Albright, price is worth it if 500,000 people die. For what? For what? You know, but it's, anyways, I think that it's something to think about. More talking and more collaborations, and especially with young people and students is excellent. And maybe a sister city, it's something that wouldn't be too hard to find out.
Sister, I was, the organization Connect US Russia, we were involved, we created the sister city relationship with Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Novosibirsk. And it was a good thing. I can't say that there were, really a lot of demonstrable results that came out of it. It's much more difficult to do that today than it was then. Yeah. And it, to the degree, one of the things that catches me about what you just said is, I do believe that what you're talking about is citizens diplomacy as opposed to, and I think any way we can do that, and that's basically what's happening here, is it's citizens diplomacy. It's between, one of the, when I first started out, I've been to Russia 46 or 7 times, I think. And in the early years, my job was to come over and to take someone like Olga and convince her that communism was not a good thing, and that democracy was the way to go. Yeah. Well, you can imagine how successful I was. I finally decided that maybe there was a better way to go about this whole thing. And in fact, somebody asked about a book. One of the best books I think you can read about Russia is called From Nyet to Da by Yale Richmond. And it will give you as good a read and insight into what it means to be Russian.
So can you just say from Nyet?
From Nyet to Da.
Spell the word.
Yeah, it's N-Y-E-T. It's from Nyet means no in Russian.
Yes.
From Nyet to Da, which means yes. So it's from
D-A is
D-A, right.
Okay.
And what I discovered is that things became a lot more fruitful and absolutely fascinating when I kind of had an attitude readjustment. And all this time, what I'm still doing is I am trying to figure out what it means to be Russian. And in order to do that, the first thing I have to do is suspend judgment. And it's hard. It's very hard. But what it has yielded in terms of an approach of trying to understand another people, another culture, what it means to be Vietnamese, I don't care how you apply it. That's been the quest that keeps me going, and the lovely part of it is you never get there, but it sure is fun trying. Okay? But it's a different way of looking at things, and it takes you out of what we've been talking about today in the confrontational relationship that exists between our countries. And what you discover, what it means to be Russian, it means to be like two very lovely ladies and good friends that we have right here.
Thank you.
Well, it's also important to just listen to an average citizen talk about our life in the Soviet Union and under the system, and to see that the propaganda that we get has nothing to do with the lives of the ordinary people and how they looked at their own country. I met a woman who was over here. I was doing ESL at the Chita Institute, and she was an elderly Russian who'd been a professor of architecture in St. Petersburg. And she came here because her sister was married to an American, and so she was able to enter in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And she was Jewish, and she loved St. Petersburg and lived there all her life. And her parents had been doctors when it was Leningrad, and they had starved to death serving the people. They'd gotten their daughters out of the city during the siege in the Second World War. And I said, well, you're Jewish. Did you experience anti-Semitism in Russia? And she said, well, professionally a little bit. And I said, so you're glad to be here? And she said, no. I love St. Petersburg. It is beautiful architecturally. I had a good place to live. The government gave us medical care, education, and food. And she said, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the capitalists came in, and I could not afford to live there anymore. So I had to get help from my sister to come to the United States. But she said, no, if the Soviet Union hadn't collapsed, I would have died there. I was fine.
Yeah.
And I said, really? I said, even though you admit there was prejudice in the society? She said, there's always prejudice against Jews. That's what she said. And I said, okay.
I wish we'd say anti-Jewish instead of anti-Semitic, because there's more Semitism than...
Right.
So what is your day-to-day, I mean, is there anything about your day-to-day lives that you want to share with us? And the other thing I wanted to say, I don't want to talk too much, but like one of the things that WHAM does is support movements of people who want to change our foreign policy to be less militaristic and human rights oriented. When we really, when there's going to be a war, there's big demonstrations, when there's been demonstrations about how we treat people at the border, and just that, how our policies treat other people. And is there any, I'd like to know what your day-to-day life, and if there's anything comparable like that in the Soviet Union.
Russia. You mean right now?
Russia, I'm sorry. I just still have.
See, we still, for a certain age, we still think USSR.
What are the issues that you're concerned about in your daily life?
Or your daily life?
I was just, if it's, I don't know, everything is interconnected. My daily life is teaching and teaching and teaching different groups, different amounts, different ages. And I was
Raising kids.
Kids. Oh yes, I have family. I just forgot.
Do you teach young children or?
As well. Yeah.
Is older children or older teenagers?
Yeah, at the universities I deal with students, and I also have school children.
Private students.
Private students and groups of school children, and adults for Spanish classes and English classes as well. So I have different ages. I communicate with people of different ages, like 12 hours a day. But I was just, I had that. I completely agree with Colin about those programs, that people's diplomacy that help a lot. Once a person comes here for a program, he gets back home and he will never say that commonly accepted Americans are all bad people. Never. But the majority can do that. And it seems like it has become more difficult. I am an example of that. I applied for Fulbright 3 times and I got rejected. And Olga is twice a Fulbright alumni.
Because I applied and was granted this Fulbright scholarship twice in a different period of time, when the relations between the countries were different, were not that.
So they say that, I don't know if that is true. I believe you are more knowledgeable, have sources of information more reliable than I do, but what they say is that Donald Trump signed a memorandum or a document that limits Fulbright funding for public officials in Russia and teachers of state universities, which I am. So whatever good my application is, I applied with different projects. We have a joint academic project with Irene Duranczyk from the University of Minnesota, and I applied with a curriculum development program project. And I also applied for a program for visiting scholars and scientific research on Russian Orthodoxy that we spoke about at the conference this year. And they don't officially stop Fulbright in Russia, but it feels like it doesn't work anymore. And they don't, I met a girl yesterday, she's from Russia and she's on Fulbright here. And I asked her, how did you do that? And she said, well, she applied for a different program. She's not a teacher at a university in Russia. She left university and then she applied to come here, and she's a professor assistant. She applied for a different program. There are 3 programs to apply. I applied for 2 and she applied for the 3rd one. And she said that the program is 1 year long, and she said, we had a call after 1 year, we had a call from Fulbright, and they said, if you want to stay in Minnesota for 1 more year, you can stay, because we have no people to send to the United States. So there are no applications, there are applications, but thanks to those restrictions, we cannot send anybody. We don't have people to send to the United States, and they were offered a 2nd year, and they accepted, and she's here for the 2nd year. And people do apply in Russia, but they can't get it. So it becomes more and more difficult. I encourage my students to apply for different programs, students exchange, summer programs, everything. They never, not a single student of mine actually got. I know that it's not, you cannot do it from the first effort anyway, but it looks like, it feels like it's changing, and it's changing to worse. And there was something else. And about students, and we were talking about that, but I just wanted to formulate again Olga's and mine most important guiding principle in teaching is that knowledge before judgment.
Knowledge before judgment.
And that because everybody has some idea or opinion about everything that's going on in the world, especially about the United States. But what we teach students, and everybody actually, that we deal with it, you have to just read things, learn things first. Yes, you have the right to have an opinion, but your opinion has to be informed. And
not the U.S.
The
Not on
United States
Facebook.
is known the best country for training students in the spirit of critical thinking. Isn't it what you are doing? Critical thinking?
We try, but
I think we've lost a lot of that. I think there was a time, maybe, but I think I'm finding English majors are better at this than anybody. I'm just, they're taught some critical ways of looking at literature, but I don't know. I'm amazed right now. I work with an environmental organization. These young people in MN 350 have such good critical thinking skills that they can challenge our government officials like I've never seen before. And maybe I'm naive, but I'm just going, oh my gosh. In fact, the government officials they know they have to be on their toes and they try to offer them carrots. And that means that's a figure of speech, but they just stand right up to them and,
I believe in the young people.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of climate change, one of the things that I've heard is that because of warming, of course, a lot of people in Minnesota initially, when they called it global warming, we were kind of happy. And I assume maybe in Siberia too, if they thought, oh, we're gonna warm up a little. And so one of the, whether it's partially propaganda or maybe, a little over exaggeration, but you hear this a lot, with warming, Siberia will now get to grow longer time and they could become an agricultural force. And so this is a dirty Russian plot. I actually get people on my Facebook saying it's a Russian plot, that they're going to be more, other places are going to suffer and drought and all the rest. But the Siberia is going to have better weather, better agriculture, etc. So, that's a good thing.
But then you also hear the tundra will thaw and all the methane will be released and it'll kill everybody.
And we have more carbon in our food.
Yeah. Well, it might be good, in other words. Maybe not, but who knows?
It's true. In Russia, I heard once I heard somewhere on TV that awful, I don't know what, snowfall or fires. There was some natural disaster, unusual thing. And they said, that's American testing their climate.
Oh yeah, that's probably true.
Dr. Levin, you said that you presented a paper on Russian Orthodoxy that was in San Francisco? So you got to visit San Francisco. Did you visit the cathedral there?
Was it closed or what was it?
It was closed.
Oh, it was closed.
The Russian Orthodox Cathedral?
Oh yeah, there is a Russian neighborhood.
There's one in the United States.
Yeah.
Was it closed because they didn't have
That's
enough
actually what they were talking about.
No.
The mission to the United States in the 19th century. Built that.
I was reading a book about
under
that.
renovation?
Once
That's what
to
their
visit
paper
both
was.
the cathedral and fortress, and
Oh.
we didn't manage
Oh.
either of that.
Didn't have enough time.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Russians had a fort in California, and my mother was born just north of there in 1923. But the Kashaya band of Indians, I don't know if they intermarried, but they reproduced with the Russians. And when the Russians went back to Siberia, they went there, because they went up to Alaska and then crossed. A lot of the Kashaya women went with them, and the second biggest collection of Kashaya Indian baskets is in Siberia. Because those women weaved them there or took what they had with them. And there's a big one in California, but a huge one in Siberia. And that's because those American Indian women went back to Siberia with the Russians.
Because I wonder in Siberia, are there a lot of
In the
tribes still?
mid-19th
Siberia?
Like tribes.
Well, tribes like the native tribes that are here in this country, although they're diminished greatly because of it. But are there?
There used to be many ethnic tribes in Siberia.
But not as many?
What do you have? Who do you have now? Buryats, Evenks, Buryati, Evenki, Aleuti, to not sure. Tungusi.
Tungusi?
The Tungus and the Vik, are they the same people?
No, not
No?
the same. Close, they're
Close.
close,
Yeah,
close
they're
kin.
not part.
Okay.
So you seem to be an expert.
Yes.
I feel that. Well, I would like to know more about you.
Oh, well, I spent 4 years in Balto, Inner Mongolia, in not the country Mongolia, in Mongolia, China.
Inner Mongolia.
I was teaching at the Inner Mongolia University of Science and Technology. And I mean, recently I've been reading more like books and things about that, about the cultural exchange between Russia and China, including, and actually it's kind of funny because it's really closely related to Russian-American exchange as well, in weird ways. But when I was there, like, Balto was basically built in the 1960s after the Sino-Soviet split happened between Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin as an industrial bulwark against Soviet expansion southward. So you have this massive city in the middle of the grasslands, and on the edge of the desert, a Gobi Desert. And right now, it's actually, when I was there in 2012, it was a boom town because all the rare earth processing, all the rare earth metals, all the phone, all the like cell phone things, like all the electronics market in Balto, that was all just booming. But you know, a lot of my students were Mongolians, Buryats. We even had a teacher at our school who was Ukrainian. So that just sort of became an area of interest for me. So I started reading things by Sergei Shirokogorov, who was an ethnographer who lived in China, who mentored the father of Chinese sociology, Fei Xiaotong. But he wrote his books on the Tungusic and Evan people. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of cool. So I just,
Uzbek and who?
what?
You said Uzbek?
The Tungus people?
Tungus?
The Tungus, they speak a language that was closely related to the Manchus, who used to rule China during the 19th century. And there are several tribes, the Sibe, the Ibenkil, the Manchus, and several other ones. I forgot all of the names. But the Oroken, but they also speak some similar languages, and they all have some of the same like myths, and like a lot of them are now Russian Orthodox, and some of them are Buddhists now. But they live on both sides of the Russian-Chinese border, including in Mongolia. So.
You could have visited Chita.
I would have loved to.
Yeah.
I really would have loved
Very close.
to. I was actually wondering how you spoke Chinese, but so you lived in China, right?
Are English language classes common in Russia or in Siberia?
What was
English language, is it common course in Siberia?
Everywhere.
A lot of.
It's obligatory.
It's mandatory course.
It's mandatory?
I mean, here we think English is the only language there is, but.
It's second only in Russia.
I don't know. It's hard to
Every child starts English at the age of
I'm teaching here at Higher Ground Academy.
at school, 11 years, 10 years at school, and then everybody has English. At college, it depends. I mean, some of them have all 4 years of English, some majors, just like law students, they only have a year or 2 years of English. And they can also choose a second language, like in Chita, it's primarily Chinese, of course. So my students, for example, students of global economy, they study English and Chinese all the 4 years of their college instruction.
English and Chinese, you said?
Yes.
I was going to say, I was doing a volunteer production at KFAI, which is a community radio station here. And one of the women I worked with took Russian and speaks Russian fluently, and she volunteers at the Russian art, what is that, Russian Museum of Art?
Yep.
Have you gone there?
I was there yesterday.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Did you get there?
Yeah. Yes. That was authentic?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's I was there once, but
I've just joined the board. I'm now on the board of trustees of the museum. That is the gem in the Twin Cities community.
Where is it?
It's right off of Diamond Lake Road on Stevens
Right.
Island.
it's on Diamond Lake Road,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
She also knew a couple, there was, from the First Unitarian Society, there were a lot of Soviet-American friendship that would go to the Soviet Union. And she knew a couple that used to be members of the First Unitarian Society. So I knew about that. And she knew them.
What's
Like
her
a
name?
temple?
Well, Bill and Eleanor Otterlitz. They're long dead, but they were a couple that engaged in that, and I knew other people who did as well.
Who is the Russian woman that you...
Oh, she's not Russian. Her last name is Peterson, but she speaks Russian fluent. She took it in college.
She worked for me on my staff at Concordia Language. I was the dean of the Russian village.
Oh, you were?
Concordia Language, and she worked on my, that's Jana. Yeah, it's a small world.
Small world.
So I know her. She was,
Joni Peterson?
yeah. She worked for me when I was the head of the language village, the Russian village for Concordia.
She would also, well, I'm getting into something that people don't know, but she was also a teaching assistant for Chuck Segman, who was in the music department at General College. And he was our choral director at the First Unitarian Society. So that's something else.
She's there too.
At the same time?
So, till we wrap this up, it's almost 1 o'clock. He's aware too.
I think some other people are using the room.
Is anyone, oh, okay, any other questions that people would like to ask our guests or comments?
I'm just wondering about, I'm trying to read some Russian authors, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and just like, what part of Russian history would you like us to study? Or past?
If you have time.
I'm trying to.
She's convalescing right now.
Does Santa Claus still come to Siberia?
I have a question. What do you think of Tolstoy? I'm reading this book right now, The Kingdom of God is Within You, where he's talking about pacifism a lot. And, I'm just kind of wondering what you think of that 1800, that period, and that was a big time of Russian immigration to the United States too.
If you ask our opinion about Tolstoy, he's a genius.
Yeah.
World famous and acknowledged genius.
What about Dostoevsky?
Personally, he's not my favorite.
I don't even want this book.
And you had a question?
So we talked about, citizen diplomacy and Skyping. So I'm wondering if, you or the people working with you could help us facilitate some Skype conversations between young people here and in Russia, and then we could film them and,
Do you have a group in mind?
Not yet.
I do. That's exactly what we want to do.
That'd be perfect for my school over in St. Paul.
I'll give you a contact info. That's exactly what we want to be doing.
That's
It's a Friends school, so it's a Quaker school. It's a
Oh, no, we don't do Quakers. Just kidding.
I've done it for the market.
Let's get contact information.
And this young man too.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Time
They would love
in the
that.
region, a long time, so.
And we have just one more question. Are there any WHAM-like groups that you know of, or that, kind of protest against war and that kind of thing? No? No? You don't have any like that?
I don't know of any. I don't know of any.
They don't have any overseas bases.
Like I told you, that we are great ones for having kitchen talks.
Yeah.
What about Amnesty International?
We know about that.
I know all my gay friends are excited about this.
Are there chapters in Russia?
Please.
My friends,
Okay.
must be. I'm sure there's a
People are not,
That's all I can do.
it's different. It's a different way of expressing citizenship or position. Yeah, Russian people prefer talking to each other, not speaking aloud. And well, you cannot see those, I don't know, demonstrations, people gathering and expressing their attitude in Chita.
Well, you know that in Moscow there is a lot of dissent. You
How
know.
big is Chita?
Anytime anything happens, we hear about it.
350,000 people.
What's good size?
Well, it's small by Russian standards.
I'm actually going to say, like Balto, they consider Balto to be a small city. It's 1.5 million people. For Chinese standards.
Yeah, well. Chinese are huge cities. One more thing. What kinds of dissent? You say in the big cities that are dissenting, what field are they dissenting?
Against the government, against the, well, the outcome of the elections, anything.
Garbage.
The
In
biggest.
Moscow, big thing about the garbage. Which they now, and the way they're solving it,
Yeah,
they're
right.
transporting the garbage up to Archangel to dump it in the swamps up there. One of the things, my perception, they may disagree with me, but if you read the news, you'll see that locally, there are people who are out on the streets demonstrating. There are people who are going to town hall meetings protesting. They're taking down what they call the 5-story apartment houses and supposedly replacing them with better housing in Moscow, and it's not working well. People are out and they're concerned, but there's no such thing as an opposition that gets together. I mean, it's all localized. But people are dealing with issues just like we deal with them here. But they're, in my perception at least, they have, Navalny is supposedly the oppositional leader, but he can't unify anything.
Yeah.
So if you look at the local news, you'll see people who are addressing, concerned about all kinds of issues.
You know, my concern is, because I heard that when Putin came in after Yeltsin, he brought more stability and he brought some respect to what Russia was doing. Is that true?
That is true.
Absolutely.
But now he's persona non grata with a lot of Russians?
No,
He's not.
no.
That's something I hear. The kind of propaganda you get.
You can hear anything.
You can find people anywhere in Russia that like them and don't like it. But it's a different expression. They're not out the way we are against Trump or Obama or whatever you want to do. But the fact of one of the things that I think I've learned about what it means to be Russian, okay, is the Russians, you have a capacity to endure. You are much more patient than we are. You have what I might call a much more realistic approach to things. There are some things you can change and some you can't.
Black in America.
But it's
Unbelievable.
but to think of Putin, to think of it being a monolithic and Putin is in complete control and it's all good. No, there are a lot of different opinions, but they're expressed differently than we express them.
You know, my only concern is, again, some of us know the history of our, government and how it undermines. So just be cautious because our interests are not honorable. I mean, my system, this regime here is not honorable.
I'm talking about the country.
Right,
Not you.
well, the system, the U.S. system. They're not honorable. Their interests are not the interest of the American people nor the Russian people. So again, just be wary because I'm sure the Russians know that they can be sabotaged and undermined by forces that might appear to be friendly but are not friends of the Russian people.
We've invaded them before, actually.
Yeah, in 1919, was it? It was at the end of the World War I. The US went from Europe into the Soviet Union to try to stop the revolution.
You know at the same time,
Japan did.
you also know at the
Oh,
same
it
time,
had been
that-
in Siberia.
have you ever heard of the American Relief Administration? In 1921, in the ARA under President Hoover,
Yeah.
we sent food over to Russia. It's an amazing, actually there's a new book it's called A Russian Job by Douglas Smith. And it's an amazing chapter in our relationship where the Americans, I can't tell you how many millions of tons of food went at the time of their
Soviet Union.
famine.
Yeah, Herbert Hoover was
Yeah,
excellent.
and there was a,
Have you ever read Animal Farm?
oh sure, absolutely.
Orwell had a really hard time publishing that book when it was written because the Russians were such a tremendous ally of ours.
Part of imagine.
Well, the Soviet Union was.
Well, thank you. Thank you.